Wayne Roberts. He is the Connections Minister at the Memorial Church of Christ. He's been at Memorial for about 5 years, but his ministry tenure goes far beyond just that. He has spent time ministering in Colorado, California, Oklahoma. It sounds like there's been a few other places along the way as well. He has 5 kids, 10 grandkids, and I'll let you decide which one of those he likes more. He has been married to Miss Tammy for 45 years at the end of this month, and they are probably most well known for their marriage seminars, the His Shoes, Her Shoes seminars that they do all over, I guess at this point, the world? Yeah, Western Caribbean at least, and I'm sure they're trying to look to expand and broaden their scope even a little bit more. So if you have any interest in Asia or Europe or Australia, certainly let them know, and they would love to talk to you guys about how they can get their seminars out there. That's all the stuff that they had for me to say about them, but I certainly want to just make one more personal plug on behalf of Wayne. Wayne and Tammy are part of the reason why I'm actually here. They were part of the group that brought my parents to Christ. So there is certainly a close relationship that I've had with the Roberts. I consider them a second set of grandparents. They mean so much to me. Wayne is such an incredible thinker. The way that he thinks through things and presents them in an engaging way is something that's so exciting, and just he's passionate about sharing his love for the Lord with others, and certainly I know we're going to be seeing that tonight. So this time, Wayne, come preach the word.
He did a fantastic job introducing me until he said he is like a second set of grandparents to me. He could have easily said he's like a younger brother to me, but he chose not to. He could have said he's like a better dad than my dad to me. No, instead he had to point to my age. It was not so much that it's an insult to me, but I didn't want everybody going, do you think Miss Tammy is that old as well? The answer is no, she is younger than me. It is good to be back here. Let me just ask a quick question. How many of you here have attended one of the monthly date nights where Tammy and I spoke? Okay, you all don't have to listen because marriage ain't changed since the last time I was here. I have a challenge tonight, and that is that when Tammy and I do our seminar, wherever it is, she usually is alongside of me. She brings the depth, the understanding, the Jesus, the practicality, and I usually am the, at least I think so, pithy comic relief. She's not up here tonight, and so I had to remind her as we were coming in, I don't want to see you nod your head yes, no, I don't want you making faces, and I sure don't want you to be heckling me. So she has promised to behave herself as long as I don't mess up. So anyway, to begin tonight, I'm glad to be the first, and the reason why is you have nothing else to compare it to, and anybody that comes along, either you're going to go, they weren't as good as him, or you're going to go, this guy was so much better. So I'm going to do somebody a real service in all of that. But a few years back, they discovered this group of gigantic redwood trees in California. I mean, some of them 300 foot into the sky. One of the things they found out was most amazing about them was the fact that their root system is relatively shallow. Typically, you think about a plant that its root system somewhat compares to or matches whatever's above the ground, but not so much with these redwood trees. And so as they begin to investigate it, they go, how have these things withstood heavy rainfall and winds and at times snowfall and all these other things, and they're still standing upright? And what they discovered is that the root systems of those redwoods are actually interconnected. And so no single tree stands on its own root system. And I think that that has a little bit to do with the topic that I have been asked to address tonight, which is basically having our marriages rooted. Because it is not good, God said, for man to be alone. And he presented man with a bride, a wife named Eve, and the two, the text tells us, will become one flesh, right? They'll be mixed or mingled together, if you will. Their root system is going to become intertwined. And through that process, God gives us a resource, for those of us who are married, a resource to help us when times are good and to help us in times are bad, to make us a better version, if you will, of us, and in turn, hopefully and prayerfully, that we're helping them to be a better version of us. So tonight, as I think about that, I wanted to think a little bit about roots and how they work in a plant, and see if maybe we can take something that's familiar and tie it to something that might be a little unfamiliar or maybe misunderstood, and clear that up a little bit. So Tammy sat down next to me, and I said, I hope there's some married people here. And she said, you can talk about marriage anytime. And I said, would you go to a nursing home, and would you talk to a bunch of these people in a nursing home about marriage? And she said, yes, I would ask them about their memories. And I said, I don't think she meant that to be informative or motivational. It would be interesting to see if any of them remembered anything, I think. So wherever you are, I believe that there's a lesson, whether it is that you are currently married, whether a short period of time or a long period of time, because we need those lessons too, or somebody that's contemplating or even planning to be married, somebody who at one time maybe was married and lost a spouse for whatever reason, or if you're somebody that going, marriage could not be further from my mind, you have an opportunity to gain understanding for yourself, but also that you can share with others when you find them struggling, as we're seeing more and more happening in our world. So I hope that the way I present it is a way that is not just understandable, but a way that maybe is kind of motivational. That is, if I can remember it. So when we talk about the roots in a plant, roots serve three purposes. Number one is a root system, and we've already talked a little bit about that, is it provides stability for the plant. So when we talk about marriage, we want the things that will make a marriage do more than survive. That it'll be things that make a marriage thrive. The things that will hold up a marriage, that will develop a marriage, that will grow a marriage. But in addition to that, roots also provide nutrition from the water and the minerals that are pulled from the soil in and throughout the plant. And so we want some things that we can root our marriage in that will make our marriage even better, right? In other words, it's not, marriage isn't just as some at their wedding, they say, till death do us part, meaning I hope it never ends. Others use that as an escape clause. I can't wait till he goes to his reward, right? So in that regards, we need to understand that it's supposed to be more than something that is to endure through, but it's a blessing. And so this root system for marriages is that which is going to provide constant nutrition to make it the very best. And then the third thing that roots do, especially amongst desert plants, and that is the fact that it draws in those nutrients, but it works to hold those and to provide them when there is a drought condition, when there is a need. It has a healing element to it. And so what we want to do is we want to prepare our marriage not just for it to be a strong marriage and a growing marriage, but a marriage that is protected from the things that this life that exists in a broken world might bring against our marriages. And so I thought, where am I going to start with that? And here's what I finally decided to do, is I want to offer you tonight 5 ways to root your marriage. I really tried to do something where you could root your marriage. It just never quite worked for me. So 5 ways, and that's what I'm going to focus on in the time that I have been allocated. So first of all, and that has to do with what every plant has, which is called a tap root. You might have seen it if you've ever pulled a plant up, maybe trying to weed the garden or something, and you'll, of course, see the stalk or the stem of that plant and its branches and its leaves. But when you pull it up, there's that one main root that goes all the way down, and from it spiders off a network of kind of like spider webs of other roots. The tap root in a marriage is that which holds the marriage secure. And I'm going to, for those of you that don't want to stay and listen through the whole thing, I want you to hear this, because this is the most important part of any part of my marriage presentation, and that's this. A God-first, God-centered marriage is essential. I'm not saying that there's no way to find happiness in a marriage without Jesus. I'm not saying that any marriage that doesn't have Jesus won't last. I'm not even saying that a marriage that doesn't have Jesus in it won't have a measure of fulfillment. But I will say this, that a marriage that does not have itself rooted in Jesus is a marriage that is at risk, far greater than any other marriage is. Secondly, is that if it's not rooted in Jesus, it is one that is going to live for each other or for self rather than for him, and that's a problem for marriages. And that you will never find a marriage to be as fulfilling as a marriage that is rooted in Jesus. Originally, this point I was going to call Pick Your Pot Well. You know, where are you going to plant your marriage? And the answer is in Jesus. But I thought, since Jesus says, I'm the vine and you're the branches, it only seems fitting that as we talk about marriage, that principle, though that is about the kingdom and about the church, that it carries over. And that is the fact that Jesus says, listen, I am the root. I am that tap root that holds everything together. It is from me and how I work in your marriage that your marriage is going to come to its fullest. In fact, if you think about it, I mentioned it just a moment ago in the introduction, is that a lot of times a plant reflects what is below the surface. And so the root system is going to have a lot to do with what that looks like on the outside. So if it is something that is rooted in something other than Jesus, that marriage may not be a reflection of Jesus. And without getting on to a second sermon, because if I get a second sermon, then I'm going to have to do a bigger invitation. We're going to have to pass the collection plate. You know how that goes, right? So the idea is this. A marriage that isn't Jesus glorifying, isn't a reflection of Jesus, is counter to our life purpose. And so I want you to realize, and by the way, I don't just mean that a husband and wife are quote-unquote Christians. They go to church all the time. They even go to Wednesday night church and vacation Bible school. They read their Bible. They say their prayers. They're good people. I'm talking about those that recognize that God ordained, God regulates, God blesses, and God will punish those who violate his ordinances regarding marriage. Marriage was not an invention of mankind. It was something that God designed and provided for men and women, for husbands and wives. And so as such, it has to be the way he put it together. That concept of one man, one woman for one lifetime, and though a broken world might interrupt that, that has always been God's plan. But more importantly is, when difficulties come along, you're going to you're going to need to have him on your side. And in those desert times, those desert seasons, those difficult times within your marriage, if you do not have that to rely on, you're relying on things that in and of themselves always will be insufficient, but never is the case with Jesus. So, the tap root is important because it represents, at least in my mind and by way of illustration, it represents the covenant relationship that marriage is, not with Tammy in my case, or her with me, but it is with God. Probably the biggest misunderstanding in marriages in general, even amongst those who are believers or followers is this, that the marriage were two people that came to some kind of an agreement with one another. It is not. Marriage is a covenant that God laid before them, and they both agreed to enter into that covenant with Him, and as such, then now they are in covenant with one another. And this relationship has a lot to do with this relationship. And this relationship, I could just tell you, has a lot to do with what this relationship looks like. And so, it is essential that your marriage begins where it needs to, and that is being rooted in Jesus with a God-first, God-centered marriage. A marriage, as one person put it, a marriage that is rooted in Jesus grows upward because it is first rooted downward in Him. So, that's number one. Number two, and that is the nutrient role that roots play. Our marriages need to be fed, and we often feed it with what we call love. And that's right, except I can just tell you that not everything that we call love is in fact really love. It requires a real redefining or maybe clarifying of what love really means. So when you think about a root system that draws from the ground and feeds the plant, you recognize that the very premise of that is not what does the root get out of it, but what does the plant get out of it, right? In other words, its role as a nutrient supplier, provider, transporter is about giving. And the love that is been described between a husband and wife is not just that ooey gooey feeling. That's part of it. There is a place for an emotional attraction, a physical attraction. But love, the word, means to empty oneself for the sake of another. It is a choice action. It's not the way I feel. It's the way I act, and at times, in spite of how I feel. Simply put, this kind of love is the love that seeks the well-being of the other person over oneself. I don't know if any of you remember in math we used to have that greater and less than symbol. You remember, any of you remember that? That's okay if you don't, because I have to be reminded of it. But if you can imagine that looks like you, speaking of your spouse, is greater than me. Tammy, when we entered into that covenant relationship, at that moment became the one. Now, I thought she was the one when I met her, when I married her. But when I entered into that covenant, she became the one. She became the most important one. She now became my purpose in marriage is to please her, is to serve her, is to honor her, is to support her, even if it costs me something. And so when people talk about, I don't feel it anymore, or I have fallen out of love, then I question whether or not they understood what love was in the first place at all. It is important to realize that this kind of love is about giving, not getting. Now, I was given the text of Ephesians chapter 5 because it probably is the most extensive single passage about marriage, right? That's that wives be subject to your husbands, husbands love your wives, and how marriage is a representation of what the Christ and His church relationship is. But within that is an often overlooked verse, and the reason why is because we go, wives, be subject or submissive to your husbands. But did you know that it actually turns around and says, and husbands, be submissive to your wives? Let me just read very quickly for you. It says, wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. And then it says, and husbands, verse 25, love your wives as Christ loved the church, listen, and gave Himself up for her. That word love there is a word that says that you're going to surrender to her needs. Now, this isn't, I'm not rearranging the family. I'm not taking away male spiritual headship. But if you'll notice, the entire section is previewed in verse 21. And be subject to one another out of reverence, out of fear, or for the sake of, your translation might read, of Christ. And so when we listen to the world that tells us, well, you're not getting, you should be getting, if I were you, I wouldn't, then we have lost track of what this kind of love is. And somebody goes, well, that doesn't seem fair. It's not about being fair. It's about being what you agreed to when you came into that. An old friend of ours who passed away during the pandemic, Matthew knew him as well. His name was Bill. Bill always said it's about trying to outdo one another in service. Now, I have to be careful because sometimes what I do is I outdid you in service. Point for me. Okay, see, that's kind of contrary to what it's supposed to be, but it's recognizing that sacrifice is the greatest single expression of love. Now, for any of you who have any Bible knowledge whatsoever, Old Testament sacrifices makes you think of what? Yeah, that animal split gut to gullet, thrown up on an altar, and burned up and fumed as an offering to God, right? Not what you'll see on a Hallmark card. You know, you're not going to say, I love you this much, and there's a calf there split wide open, right? Or if you go to the New Testament and you think about sacrifice, what do you think about? Think about Jesus, right? Offered as the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world, who offered himself on that cross, who was in fact killed in the same way. Still, not very romantic. Hi, for Valentine's Day, I got you a cross with a mangled body hanging on it just to show you I love you. But those of you who know anything about what Jesus did, what is the single greatest act of love, not just committed in the New Testament, but in all of human history? Jesus sacrificing himself. And so guess what? That's our example of what love looks like. And so to have that kind of root that is about nourishing your marriage is that it is rooted in love. Boy, I'm glad that this is a 3-part series. I'm looking forward to the next few weeks with you all. I don't know who is next week, but go ahead and tell him he's off the hook. Number 3, and that is that there is a root network. All of those roots that transfer nutrients and moisture and everything from the soil to the plant are all connected to the plant. And I like to think of it as the fact that your marriage is staying connected through communication. It's fed by love, but when the communication is severed, the relationship is severed. We shouldn't be surprised with that because what? Well, communication's been part of our relationship from the very beginning. Now, it might have been nonverbal, the glance across the crowded floor, but at some point in time, somebody spoke to the other one and said, hey, I wonder if you'd like to go out for a Coke. Would you like to go to the movie? Would you like to go out on a date? And then we had all that communication, right? Getting to know one another. Then would you marry me? And that all-important communication, yes, right? And then we had the communication at the wedding. I do. Communication is always part of our relationship. The problem is when our communication becomes severed or damaged, where it's not good communication. And what I mean by that is good communication helps and heals a marriage. Bad communication is detrimental and can even destroy. And that doesn't always mean in bad words. Sometimes it means in no words at all. 2 people who are living in the same house, but they are separated because they virtually never speak. We know the power of the tongue, right? Jesus' half-brother James talks about it. He says, oh man, it is like the rudder on a big ship. It's little in comparison, but when it moves, the entire vessel is going to change. He says it's like a spark that though it seems insignificant, it can set an entire forest on fire. He says if you can ride your tongue like a horseman rides a horse with bit, bridle, and reins in mouth, if you can manage that beast, you will find that you are well on your way to managing the entire body, because the tongue is a powerful thing. And if you don't believe James, believe this. We have words in our vocabulary today that we recognize are so powerful that we have boiled them down just to a letter, right? Because they're harmful, because they're hurtful, because they don't build up, they take down. And yet we sling them out in our marriages as if it doesn't really matter. We could probably have spent the entire night just talking about the communication. But let me just mention a few things that I think will help you in your communication. Number one is hush. That one was for me. It may not apply to you. But if you are the person that always has a thought, always has an idea, always has to insert their opinion, blah, 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 hush and listen, right? Listen. Listen to learn, and then learn to listen, and then listen to learn. Tammy and I one time, I could remember where we were standing. I don't remember the subject matter, but I can tell you right now that it got elevated. Now, Tammy and I don't have communication issues other than keeping the neighbors from hearing it, but it was getting elevated. And as is the case sometimes, I was not able to convince her of my position. And as it is frequently the occasion, she was not able to convince me of hers. And in that back and forth, we both got pretty put out and disgusted with one another, to the point that one of us, in frustration, said, "Are you suggesting that we do this?" And the other one said, oh no, she didn't point her finger. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." And the other said, "It can't be what you're suggesting. That's what I was suggesting." We had the exact same perspective, but either in the method we were communicating it or the way we were phrasing it, we didn't understand because we weren't spending any time listening. I have a hard time listening. I was just telling my new old friend David just a moment ago that I will repeat his name back. I will think of David, the good shepherd, David against Goliath, David Duncan, who I work with, but this is not him. I'll say David, and the next time I see him, I'm going to go, "Oh, sweetheart, how you doing?" Because I can't remember David. I am not a good listener, but I found a little bit of a trick. You can become a better listener not by making statements, but by asking questions. It's just a way of saying, "So if I understand you correctly, you're saying," or "What would you have had me done?" or "Did that bother you? And if so, why?" Right? Because now I'm going to listen to what she has to say. I'm going to probably understand it clearer than I drew my own conclusion before she was done. And because I'm not listening, I'm just preparing and constructing my retort, right? And then here's, as the salesman says, this is the beauty of the program. After I have asked questions and after I have listened to her and after I have learned her perspective, guess whose turn it is to talk? It's mine. I now have earned the right to express my thoughts, my feelings, my difficulties, my understandings. And the whole time that I was asking questions, I got to talk. So it works good for a guy like me. But learning to listen. The second is, simply put, eradicate bad communication by filling your communication with good. Right? Think of the old couple sitting on their porch at their 50th wedding anniversary. I'm going to make that longer. Their 75th wedding anniversary. As we get to 45 this year, I'm like, that can't be us. They're sitting there and everybody's gone home, and finally the wife says, "That was a good day." He goes, "Yep." She goes, "Been quite a long time." "Yep." She says, "I hate to spoil it, but I noticed that you don't ever say 'I love you' anymore." And he says, "Well, I told you on our wedding day, if it changes, I'll let you know." We quit saying "I love you." We quit saying "thank you." We quit saying "please." We'll open the door for somebody at Walmart. You don't need slides open by itself, but we'll open the door for somebody at the store. But with our own spouse, it's an expectation, right? I learned that young ladies are now not just giving credit for boys who open the doors for them. They're giving them demerits if they don't, as if all of us, when we were young men, had it all figured out. Just write it down, guys, okay? They're marking you down on those things. Open every door. In fact, when you get up to the car, just open all 4 doors and let her hop in wherever she wants to. But I'm just saying, we take that for granted, so we don't say I love you. We don't say thank you. We don't say please, even for those things that are mundane. In fact, Tammy will say, I like to cook, which means I spend a lot of money, dirty a lot of dishes, and I leave it for her to clean up. I said, oh, thank you for cleaning up my mess. And she goes, that's my job. And I went, that's fine if she thinks that. It's when I start thinking that, right? But it also means that, so I can start filling it with those, but there's some other good language, even though they may be in bad circumstances. For example, I'm sorry. Or even more self-incriminating, I apologize, right? Or that I forgive you, even if they haven't said I'm sorry. Those kinds of expressions, it leaves a whole lot less room for all the junk. What happens is we gradually leave a void, the absence of good communication, and guess what finds its way in? Bad. The only time we ever talk is when we fight, and the reason why is because you never talk about anything else. You don't say, I love you, I appreciate you, thank you, I'm sorry, I forgive you. So fill that. And then I think it's important for you as a couple, and this is, by the way, these are communication rules in general, not just marriage, and that is to create within your home a communication safe zone, a place where you can talk like 2 grown-up people about grown-up things, even if they're hard, and that you'll be respectful, you'll be honest, you'll be fair, you won't be argumentative. And those aren't always easy because, man, I tell you what, you're going to put the gloves on and put us in the ring, we're going to fight. Instead of saying, nope, this is a gloves off kind of thing, right? This is where we can come. Now, like, for example, Tammy and I, we get cross with one another on Monday, because we're not going to do it on the Lord's Day, right? I mean, that's the Lord's Day. But Mondays, we're usually tired, and it is not hard for us to get cross with one another. A little short-tempered, maybe it is not as rested. And we finally learned that when I'm being a complete idiot, when I'm not listening, when I'm being thoughtless, that I can remind her, it's Monday. I go, it's Monday. Now, I can't pull that on Wednesdays, okay? I tried it. It does not work. One free pass, that's it. But it's a matter of recognizing that, and we say, hey, listen, Monday's a tough day for us. We need to keep that safe zone. But sometimes it's like we don't talk about serious things after 11 o'clock. Tammy gets up about 10, goes and takes a bath for about an hour. When she comes out, I might have gone, hey, guess what I was reading? Blah, 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 blah. Hey, I was thinking about our next trip. Blah, 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 blah. Or as she puts it, wah, 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 wah. She doesn't want to hear about it. She sure doesn't want, after a nice relaxing bath with some kind of beautiful music playing, to come in and go, I've got a few issues I'd like to take up with you now, and as a preacher, I have 3 points and a poem. Here we go, okay? So it's recognizing maybe first thing in the morning, right out of a restful night's sleep, but it's a place where you come to agreement and say, let's not do it right now. Our emotions are elevated, but we need to talk about this. Or, hey, you remember when we were both real hot about this? I'd like us to talk about that. And so you need to begin to develop, in the good times, a safe zone of honest, open communication, because when communication fails, your marriage will begin to struggle. Or as I said, when communication is good, it makes your marriage better. When it's bad, it either causes problems or makes it hard to work through other non-communication problems. And when it's absent, when it's vacant, it destroys your marriage. And so, like that root system, we need to be staying together or staying connected through that communication. Number 4, and that is that we have learned with desert plants that one of their features is their ability to grow deep, deep root systems. Because that's where the water is in a desert, arid climate, is they can dig deep. A lot of marriages struggle because they are kind of like, you know, the parable of the sower. You remember it said some of the seed fell on the stony, the hard ground, and was unable to take any root. It seems to me that even though we're trying to feed it, even though we're trying to do everything right, that one of the things that happens is we never dig any roots. It's one of the problems, and by the way, we know this statistically, that marriages, by the way, that whole thing about 50% of all marriages fail, that's not a true statistic. The truth is about 25 to 30% when you take all marriages into account, that they end in a divorce. But what we do know is that when there is a divorce and another marriage, irregardless of the circumstances, there's a greater chance that that marriage will not make it. And when you go to a third marriage, those possibilities come up to like 90% of those third marriages don't last. You know why? Because we never developed deep roots. We just uprooted, moved on down the road, tried to plant again, that didn't work out, picked up and moved down there. But deep roots are more than just wishful thinking. You don't just go, we need deep roots, we need deep roots, we need deep roots. They are developed through what we call intimacy. And I don't just mean physical or sexual intimacy. Intimacy is the concept of being able, thank you, the concept of being connected together and being full. Okay, let's see, we got a few youngers here, but I'm going to try to be delicate with this. You remember God creates Adam and Eve, and there's that line that doesn't seem to make much sense, and they were naked and unashamed. Remember that line? That word naked there shares the same root word as the word in Hebrew for truth. In other words, when they sinned, their truth was what? We got sin all over us, so what did they do? We're going to hide the truth, or try to, by covering our bodies. And intimacy says, I can stand in front of you with all of my flaws, and you can see them. Not that you'll accept the mistakes or that they're okay, but that I am still accepted in that. I got to quit pointing at her because I've not had that problem personally. But you know what I'm saying is that intimacy is how we academically or mentally, emotionally, recreationally. There are so many couples that enjoy their time away from one another more than their time together. Intimacy is what allows us to grow closer together and those roots to grow deeper. Number 5, because I am going to be done on time. And that is the fact that we have healing roots. Healing roots. Because one of the reasons to work on your marriage when times are good is so that your marriage will be strong when things come along. Sometimes they're not of your making at all. It could be loss of a job. That will affect your marriage. It could be the loss of a child. That'll affect your marriage. It might be a mistake that we make. It might be some trust issue that was broken. Maybe it was an unfaithfulness. Maybe it was a harsh word that was spoken. But when a marriage has been growing and developing over time, it is better suited to have that kind of situation or that situation within a root system to hold it. And at the heart of that is simply this: forgiveness. Forgiveness is not letting people off the hook. It's refusing to carry their sin on your shoulders. I mean, you could say, I'm not going to forgive them. Like that's going to impact them. You're the one that's impacted. Again, I think there's a place you got to rebuild trust. There's a place that you're going to have to show transparency and some other things like that. But bottom line is, to not offer forgiveness is a death stake, and here's why. Because Jesus forgave you when you did the unthinkable. When you were unfaithful to the one who was always faithful. We use terms like guilty party, innocent party. When the guilty party was always the guilty party, and God was always the innocent party, and yet he offered himself for you, you can't out-forgive what God forgave. And so I'm just going to tell you, Tammy and I aren't together if it weren't for forgiveness. I got that grammar right there. If it weren't for forgiveness, we wouldn't be together. And I don't just mean she burnt the toast and I forgave her, or I burnt down the house and she forgave me. Some big things that were forgiven. And so it is essential to recognize that without forgiveness, basically you will choke a marriage out, to which it will die. So, tend the roots. If you want to see a marriage that is all that's supposed to be up here, you need to look at those things are below the surface. Maybe you need to spend time praying and replacing Christ at the center of your marriage. Maybe it's time for you to quit keeping score and starting to serve. Maybe it's time that you have a hard conversation, or maybe it's time that you just have a good conversation, a friendly conversation, a loving conversation. Maybe it is that you need to put some attention. Maybe in your life stage, physical intimacy has changed. That's not the end of intimacy. It still may be a hand holding a hand, an arm around, a smile. It may be an embrace. It may be some of those things of enjoying one another's company, or maybe there is some kind of a hurt that needs to be forgiven. Whatever it is, tend the roots. That's what makes a great marriage. That's what helps a marriage endure those difficult things. And most importantly, it is that which is a marriage that will not only be good for you, but bring glory to God. It is not specifically about marriage, but Ephesians chapter 3, just a couple chapters before, says, "For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength." What's the most fascinating thing to me about marriage is not the dynamics of two people trying to occupy the same apartment at the same time, though that's fascinating. It's the fact that the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 takes this that should have been understood and said, and when you understand this, you will understand the relationship of Christ and his church. And so within it is this invitation to have a better root system, but it's also an invitation to be a better representation of a bride's relationship with a perfect husband, Jesus. Understanding love, forgiveness, sacrifice, and service. And that is a marriage that is truly rooted. What'd I forget? I got a thumbs up. We're good. I got a thumbs up from the booth. I got a thumbs up from here. So tonight I want to challenge you, wherever you're at, to make a decision either regarding your marriage or maybe it has to do with your relationship with Jesus. Both of those are important, and one fuels and feeds the other. And is always the case, we offer an opportunity that if there's a way we can pray for you, maybe you're ready to make some kind of decision, repent of a sin. I know that the shepherds here and as well as the ministry staff are willing to talk with you and pray with you. But if a public response is appropriate, won't you just come forward? Let's stand together. I don't know. Oh, you got it, Sean? Okay. As our able-bodied brother leads us in song.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to see everybody out this evening. Brother Wayne, thank you so much for that lesson on tending our roots. We have a few announcements for prayers. Chris